The studio lights of MSNBC gleamed down on Rachel Maddow's set, polished to perfection, a stage built for control. Rachel, with her trademark glasses and confident smirk, adjusted her notes as the countdown hit 0. This wasn't just another broadcast, it was an ambush. Across from her sat Senator John Neely Kennedy of Louisiana, a man she thought she could corner with sharp questions and polished rhetoric. Maddow leaned in, her voice dripping with authority. "Senator, you claim to stand for truth, but your record shows obstruction and protection of corporate interests. Isn't it time you admit that you're just another politician shielding corruption?" The audience clapped lightly, sensing blood in the water. Kennedy, however, didn't flinch. He leaned back in his chair, calm as a stone in a storm. With his signature Southern drawl, he fired back, "Rachel, that's rich. You've spent years dressing up your opinions as news. Folks at home know the difference between facts and spin. And what you're serving up tonight, ma'am, is a buffet of spin." The crowd gasped, half in shock, half in admiration. Rachel's smirk flickered for a split second, but she pressed harder. "Senator, these aren't my opinions, these are facts, sourced and verified." Kennedy raised an eyebrow, pulling a folded paper from his coat pocket. "Funny you say that, because right here, I've got your own network's corrections from just the last 6 months. Stories you rushed out, twisted, and had to quietly retract once the damage was already done. If you want to talk about protecting corruption, maybe start with your own agenda." The silence in the studio was deafening. Rachel opened her mouth to retort, but the audience had already shifted, murmuring, eyes locked on Kennedy. He hadn't just defended himself, he'd flipped the script, exposing the cracks in her narrative. Maddow had tried to corner him, but Kennedy had just turned the lights back on her. Rachel straightened in her chair, her eyes narrowing behind the glasses as she tried to recover. She had built her career on controlling the narrative, on keeping her guests boxed in while she guided the conversation like a skilled conductor. But Kennedy wasn't playing along. He had just turned her correction sheets into a weapon, and the studio's energy shifted like a sudden draft of cold air. Maddow forced a chuckle, masking the strain in her voice. "Senator, if you think waving papers proves anything, you're mistaken. The facts speak for themselves. The American people want leaders who are honest, not entertainers with sound bites." Kennedy leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, his gaze steady, his tone sharper now. "Rachel, honesty doesn't mean cherry-picking data to fit your story. Honesty means telling the whole truth, even when it doesn't fit your politics. And the truth is, your viewers have been fed one side for so long, they don't even recognize balance when they hear it." Gasps rippled through the crowd, the tension now heavy enough to slice. Rachel's smirk faltered again, irritation flashing across her face. She jabbed a finger at him. "Balance? Senator, you represent oil companies and corporate lobbyists. You fought against policies that would help working families. How dare you lecture me on balance?" Kennedy's response came like a hammer blow. "How dare I? Rachel, I don't hide behind a TV camera to push an agenda and call it journalism. I answer to voters, real folks who pay the price when politicians and pundits lie. And if you want to talk about who I represent, let's ask the single mom in Baton Rouge, working 2 jobs just to buy groceries. She doesn't tune into your monologues. She wants results, not rhetoric." The studio audience, once firmly on Rachel's side, broke into scattered applause. Maddow's jaw tightened as she realized her grip was slipping. Kennedy wasn't just defending himself, he was dismantling her credibility, brick by brick, live on her own show. Rachel Maddow adjusted the papers in front of her, tapping them against the desk as if the sharp sound could reset the energy in the room. Her voice tightened, laced with a mix of irritation and determination. "Senator, you're trying to turn this into a personal attack. But people aren't stupid. They know where your loyalties lie. You claim to stand for working families, yet you've blocked reforms that would hold corporations accountable. Isn't it fair to say you're protecting the powerful while pretending to be their enemy?" Her words hung heavy, but Kennedy didn't flinch. He leaned back in his chair, folding his hands calmly across his lap. His drawl came slow, deliberate, almost surgical. "Rachel, you don't get to talk about protecting the powerful when you sit in a $1 million studio, backed by billion-dollar corporations, telling Americans what to think. You call it journalism. I call it theater. And I'm not the actor here, you are." The audience stirred, murmurs rippling through the studio. Maddow pressed on, trying to cut through the growing doubt in the crowd. "So you're saying the facts I present every night, the investigations, the reports, they're all lies? That's insulting not just to me, but to every journalist who risks their life for truth." Kennedy's lips curved into a faint, unshaken smile. "No, Rachel, I'm saying truth doesn't belong to you. It doesn't belong to me. It belongs to the people. And the moment you twist it to fit a narrative, you've stopped being a journalist and started being a propagandist. You know it, I know it, and more importantly, your viewers are starting to see it too." Gasps filled the air, followed by sharp applause that cut Maddow's composure like glass. Her jaw clenched, her hands tightening around the papers until they crinkled. Kennedy hadn't raised his voice once, yet every word landed like a gavel. For the first time on her own show, Rachel Maddow looked cornered. And Kennedy was just getting started. Rachel Maddow forced a smile, though the tension in her shoulders betrayed her unease. She leaned toward the camera, addressing the audience as much as the senator. "Folks, this is what we're up against, politicians who come here, dodge accountability, and spin fairy tales while people suffer. Senator Kennedy wants you to believe he's the lone truth-teller, but his record says otherwise. He's voted against measures to expand healthcare, against clean energy investments, against progress." Her tone sharpened like a blade, hoping to reclaim her authority. Kennedy, unbothered, adjusted his tie and leaned forward just enough for his words to slice through the theater of the moment. "Rachel, you want to talk about records? Let's talk about yours. For years you've told Americans that every problem starts and ends with people like me. But you never mention the corporate advertisers paying your salary, the party bosses feeding you talking points, or the selective outrage that keeps your ratings high. You're not holding the powerful accountable, you are the powerful." The audience erupted in claps and whistles, surprising Maddow. She raised her hand, attempting to calm the crowd. "That's a clever soundbite, Senator, but it doesn't change the fact that you've stood in the way of progress. People can see through this act." Kennedy's eyes sharpened, his voice now steady, commanding. "The act, Rachel, is yours. You accuse me of blocking progress, but progress doesn't mean selling out our energy independence, bankrupting families with reckless spending, or silencing parents who dare question what their kids are taught. You package it as justice. I call it a scam. And I'll keep calling it what it is, no matter how uncomfortable it makes you." The studio went silent for a beat, the kind of silence that signals a turning point. Maddow's trademark composure faltered, and for the first time, her polished certainty seemed to crack under the weight of Kennedy's relentless truth. Rachel Maddow shifted in her seat, her pen tapping nervously against the desk, the sound picked up faintly by the microphones. She tried to recover, her voice rising with urgency. "Senator, you call everything a scam. Climate reform? A scam. Expanding healthcare? A scam. At what point does your cynicism stop being realism and start being sabotage?" She leaned closer, eyes narrowing, pressing for a reaction. Kennedy didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned back, hands folded calmly in his lap, the picture of patience. When he finally spoke, his Louisiana drawl carried a quiet authority that cut deeper than any raised voice. "Rachel, it's not cynicism to point out when the emperor has no clothes. You sit here and call it healthcare reform when in reality it's a maze of bureaucracy that leaves patients begging and doctors drowning in red tape. You call it climate reform when it kills American jobs and makes us more dependent on foreign dictators. If telling the truth is sabotage, then I'll wear the badge proudly." The audience stirred, some applauded, others gasped, but all leaned in closer. Maddow's practiced control began to erode. So you're saying the experts, the data, the science, it all means nothing? That your gut feeling outranks the consensus of professionals? She shot back, her voice tinged with frustration. Kennedy tilted his head, his gaze steady. I'm saying experts don't live the lives of the people I represent. I trust the single mom in Shreveport working 2 jobs more than I trust a think tank in D.C. I trust the welder in Lafayette over a panel of consultants who never missed a paycheck. You can sneer at that if you want, but those are the voices I answer to, not the cocktail parties in Washington, and not the ratings board at your network. A murmur rolled through the studio. Maddow's attempt to corner him had backfired. Kennedy had turned her accusation into a rallying cry. Rachel Maddow's lips tightened into a practiced smile, but the tension in her eyes betrayed her frustration. She leaned forward, her voice sharper now, almost desperate. Senator, you hide behind folksy anecdotes, but this is national policy we're talking about. Real decisions, real data, real consequences. Don't you think your simplistic stories are an insult to the intelligence of the American people? The audience reacted with a mix of gasps and murmurs, some nodding in agreement, others bristling at her dismissive tone. Kennedy, unshaken, leaned toward the mic. His voice carried a cold edge this time, the Louisiana charm sharpened into a blade. Rachel, the only insult to the American people is when elites like you talk down to them. You call their lived experience simplistic? You call their pain a story? That's the problem right there. You think truth only counts if it comes wrapped in a spreadsheet or a consultant's memo. Well, I've got news for you, those numbers don't mean squat if they don't line up with reality on the ground. A thunderous applause broke out in the studio, louder than before. Rachel tried to interject, but Kennedy raised a finger, silencing the noise. You sit here with your charts and your buzzwords, but let me ask you this, when was the last time you paid $5 for a gallon of gas and had to choose between filling the tank or buying groceries? When was the last time you had to wait 6 months for a doctor's appointment because your so-called reforms buried hospitals in red tape? You haven't lived it, Rachel. My people have. And I'll take their word over yours any day. His voice echoed with conviction, filling the studio like a courtroom verdict. The audience erupted, some standing, others clapping so hard the cameras shook. Maddow's smile faltered, she knew in that moment the momentum was no longer hers. Rachel Maddow adjusted her glasses, trying to regain composure. She forced a laugh, that signature MSNBC chuckle meant to dismiss without engaging. Senator, this isn't about me, it's about facts. You love to grandstand, but the reality is, experts and economists disagree with you. Kennedy tilted his head, his expression hardening. The smile was gone. His voice dropped lower, quieter, but somehow heavier, like a gavel slamming down. Rachel, you keep hiding behind experts. Funny thing is, every time the experts mess up, it's folks like my constituents who pay the price, not you. You get a bigger paycheck, a bigger audience, and another book deal. They get the bill. The audience stirred, a murmur of agreement spreading through the room. Rachel's face tightened, her attempt at control slipping. Kennedy didn't stop. He leaned forward, eyes locked on hers. You want to talk credibility? Let's talk about your record. You spent years pushing a conspiracy about Russia and Trump night after night, promising your viewers evidence you never had. Millions tuned in because they trusted you, and what did they get? Speculation. Hype. A broken promise. You cashed in on their fear. And now you have the gall to lecture me about truth? The room froze. Even the camera operators paused, as though they knew they were capturing a moment that would go viral within hours. Rachel tried to respond, stammering, that's a mischaracterization, but Kennedy cut her off, his voice steel. No, Rachel. That's your history. And the American people haven't forgotten. You made yourself the story, and now you don't like the ending. The audience roared, a mix of shock and thunderous applause. Maddow's smile evaporated completely, replaced by a rare flash of unease. For the first time, she looked cornered. Kennedy had flipped the script, and now she was the one defending her credibility. Rachel Maddow inhaled sharply, her hands tightening around her notes. She straightened in her chair, trying to reclaim the high ground. Her voice, sharper now, cut through the studio. "Senator, you can shout all you want, but history will remember who stood for democracy and who tried to undermine it. My work has always been about holding the powerful accountable. What about you? What have you done besides playing to sound bites and stirring division?" The crowd let out a collective gasp. This was Maddow swinging back. Kennedy, however, didn't blink. He leaned back slowly, a faint smirk tugging at his lips, as though he had been waiting for this exact line. His reply was low, deliberate, and lethal. "Rachel, the difference between us is simple. You pretend to hold the powerful accountable, while being a mouthpiece for them. You covered for bureaucrats who lied, for politicians who broke the law, for corporations that lined your network's pockets. That's not journalism. That's theater. And bad theater at that." The studio erupted, half-shocked silence, half-wild applause. Maddow's face flushed, the confident mask slipping further. Kennedy pressed on, his southern drawl cutting through the tension like a blade. "You want to talk about democracy? Democracy isn't served by selling fear to boost ratings. It isn't served by pushing hoaxes and calling them facts. And it sure as hell isn't served by someone who's more interested in her primetime slot than the truth." Rachel opened her mouth to interject, but Kennedy raised his hand slightly, silencing her without even raising his voice. "So no, Rachel, history won't remember you as a champion of democracy. It'll remember you as a host who turned trust into currency, and spent it all." The room broke into thunderous applause, the cameras catching Maddow's frozen expression. In that moment, Kennedy hadn't just countered her attack, he dismantled her platform, piece by piece. Rachel Maddow sat stiffly, her jaw tight, her pen tapping nervously against her notepad. For years she had thrived in the heat of political combat, but tonight something was different. Kennedy wasn't giving her an inch, and worse, he was winning the audience. She tried to pivot, her voice raised slightly as she looked directly into the camera instead of at him. "Folks at home, don't be fooled. This is a man who's made a career out of obstruction, out of blocking progress. Ask yourself, what future does he offer?" It was a desperate play, an attempt to regain narrative control. But Kennedy seized the moment like a predator sensing weakness. He leaned forward, locking eyes with her, his voice firm and cutting. "Rachel, if telling the truth and stopping reckless politicians from wrecking our country is obstruction, then I'll wear that label proudly. Because unlike you, I don't get paid to sell lies dressed up as hope. I don't chase clicks or ratings, I fight for the people who can't afford your spin." The crowd roared, some even standing, their applause shaking the studio. Maddow's face turned pale, the camera catching the flicker of unease in her eyes. Kennedy didn't stop. He pointed toward her stack of papers, her so-called evidence. "You've built your empire on selective outrage, ignoring corruption when it suits your friends, amplifying half-truths when it helps your politics. But here's the problem, Rachel, the people aren't buying it anymore. They see through it. They see through you." A hush fell over the audience, the silence almost deafening. Maddow's lips parted, but no words came out. She shuffled her notes, her composure cracking like glass under pressure. Kennedy, sensing the finish, delivered the line that cut deepest: "The truth doesn't need a teleprompter. It doesn't need spin. And it damn sure doesn't need Rachel Maddow to translate it." The crowd exploded, chants of "Kennedy! Kennedy!" echoing through the studio. Rachel looked down, her pen frozen in her hand. For the first time in her career, she wasn't steering the debate, she was drowning in it. The final moments of the broadcast felt like history unfolding in real time. Rachel Maddow sat stiff, her trademark confidence shattered. The camera zoomed in, catching every flicker of unease across her face. She tried one last desperate jab, her voice quivering beneath the weight of defeat. "Senator, you can grandstand all night, but facts don't bend to your southern charm. People know better." Her words fell flat, thin and brittle. Kennedy leaned back in his chair, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. Then he leaned forward again, his tone sharp, his drawl cutting through the studio like a blade. "Rachel, the only thing bending here tonight is your version of the truth." And it just snapped. The crowd erupted, clapping and shouting, the energy shaking the stage. Kennedy stood, buttoning his jacket with calm finality. He looked out at the audience, then back at Maddow, his voice rising over the chaos. "You claim to fight for the people, but what you're really fighting for is relevance. You sit behind that desk night after night, cherry-picking outrage, twisting narratives, all to keep your viewers hooked. But the American people, they don't need another performer. They need honesty. They need leaders who answer to them, not to ratings." Rachel tried to interject, but the words died in her throat. The camera caught her blinking rapidly, her hand trembling as she gripped her pen. Kennedy delivered the knockout line, "Here's the truth, Rachel. When the lights go off and the cameras stop rolling, all you've got left is a script. But me? I'll still be fighting for the folks who don't get a voice on your show. And that's the difference between propaganda and principle." The audience exploded into cheers, some even chanting his name. Rachel lowered her eyes, the broadcast light reflecting off her glasses, revealing not authority, but defeat. The moderator's voice cracked through, struggling to restore order, but it was too late, the verdict had already been rendered. Kennedy hadn't just survived Maddow's ambush. He had owned it, flipping her platform into his battlefield, and walking away the undisputed victor. Tonight wasn't about me, and it sure wasn't about Rachel's ratings. It was about truth. The American people are tired of being lectured by elites who think they know better than the folks they serve. I don't come here with a script or a teleprompter. I come with the voices of farmers, teachers, small business owners, and families just trying to make ends meet. Rachel can mock, twist, and spin all she wants, but at the end of the day, the truth stands tall, and it doesn't need her approval. My message is simple: America belongs to its people, not to pundits or propagandists. And as long as I have breath in my lungs, I'll keep standing up for them, loudly, proudly, and without apology.